weapon will prosper. No enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. As I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
Well, welcome everybody. Pastor Tim Carscadden here for our pipeline report. And we're so glad you joined us here on this Monday. It is the 19th day of May, 2025. I'm on location here in Bogota, Colombia. We're doing ministry here. I'm at my accommodations here. So thank you for tuning in. I wanted to make sure I got online today and pray everything goes well technically here. Got my son, Zach. He'll be in here just a minute, but we want to thank you for those who are praying for us. We have 26 on our team here. We just did a great prophetic conference here at a church called La Casa. Pastor Guadalupeña and his son are pastors there, lead this ministry. And we're so thankful for that as well. And we still have some more work to do in the country while we're here. And so we're going to be praying this week and ministering this week. So pray for us and our team here as we go about doing what God has asked us to do, and as we move forward. There's so many things happening in the Spirit today. It'll probably be abbreviated. I have another appointment here in a little while, so I may have to check out. So we're going to get as much done in the short amount of time as we can. We titled today the Middle East stance that President Trump took recently. There are other issues. We also want to talk about former President Biden's cancer diagnosis and what's going on behind all that. I think that's a big issue, the economy, the tariffs, all the other issues that we also want to try to cover in a little short period of time. So listen quickly. Please share this with your friends if you can. Hit the like or button there if you're on YouTube and Rumble as well. Please share that with your friends that were online there doing that. And we're so thankful for God. I want to start with the scripture out of Psalm 37, verses 1 through 3 says, "Do not fret because of evildoers, but be not envious toward wrongdoers, for they will wither quickly like the grass and fade like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, and dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness." And that's what we're trying to do here on the pipeline. We're literally trying to do good and cultivate faithfulness. We come every week. We do a lot of things that we make sure that we're consistent at being faithful with what God's called us to do. And this is all part of a prophetic word for us. And so let me start with this. We'll talk with Israel first and what's going on there. Matter of fact, Saturday night during our meeting here, we had a prophetic word that we were entering into another season of higher level of war. I talked about that on my podcast today. But I mean, we're in a decade of war, but we felt like it was another season. And we felt we gave a word about Colombia being tied to Israel. Well, the next day on Sunday, you see Israel starts the war in Gaza and calls it Gideon's chariot. And matter of fact, in our prophetic words that we were given to the body here, we used the story of Gideon as an example of God raising up a group of people. And then last night, we raised up a whole army of Josiah's. I called it, the Lord told me to get 26 and under. and that they would be the Gideons for this moment in the nations. And so I feel like we're really tracking well with where we are in time. And so Israel goes into war. Now, there's many reasons they're going into war. They want to get the hostages back, number one. Number two, they want to dismantle all the tunnels. From what I've heard through different reports, they believe at least 40% of the tunnels are still in place. And of course, we know that's where the terrorists are hiding the hostages. But they also want to get the humanitarian aid in because Israel realizes that if they don't get the aid in, they'll lose the support of their allies, especially America. So they have to get the aid in there. Now, from everybody that is working within the Gaza Strip, that is legitimate at some level, it's very clear that there was plenty of aid there, but Hamas was hijacking it, taking it, using it for themselves, or selling it as black market. You'll see some of the videos from Gaza City and other cities where it's life just like you're in New York City. Restaurants open, food abounding on the streets. So it's there, but it's not getting to the people, and that's a problem. So when Israel entered in the northern Gaza on Sunday, which is yesterday, they brought humanitarian aid in as well. And I think they're going to be in charge of distributing it to make sure that it gets to the people. And I think it's really wise here in the midst of all this. The negotiation is going on. So, Zach, why don't you speak about the negotiations with America and the Israeli government concerning the hostages and what we're hearing about that?
Yeah, some major breakthrough. We've been talking about how Witkoff has kind of been a very defunct negotiator, doing a very poor job. And then I don't know, Trump gave him a new initiative or, kind of threatened him to pull him off of this, but something behind the scenes has happened where Witkoff has kind of found a backbone. And even today, some of the things he's saying are very positive in the fact towards the freedom of the hostages who are still there in Gaza. And what he's been saying over the past few days has been if Hamas doesn't release all the hostages, then that basically there's nothing that he can do, that Israel is going to go in and wipe them out. Now that there are no Americans involved, which we talked about was the fear of the reverse happening. And so Israel is using this to their advantage. They're saying, look, we're sticking to the Witkoff deal that Hamas must return all the hostages and then we will agree to a ceasefire. Hamas is trying to ask for a 5-year ceasefire. Everyone knows who has two brain cells that can be put together, has been breathing for more than 5 minutes, that Hamas uses these ceasefire deals to kind of strengthen and power themselves up. One of the good things we've seen from this weekend is the wiping out of the next layer of leadership within Hamas, and family down. And unfortunately, it has to come to this. And what we're seeing now and continuing to see every day are the true American allies and the true opposers to Israel's existence and freedom. And so even Witkoff came out today that said if Iran had even 1% nuclear capability, it was too much. This is a complete shift of
Yeah.
mindset, of talking points from Witkoff in the positive direction, not only for Israel, but for the sanity of the rest of the world. And the talking points and the understanding that if this is not dealt with by Israel, these tactics that were used on October 7th will be used in other nations around the world where these people go. Now, I want to point this out. In the beginning of what is, you mentioned Gideon, Israel is naming their ground operation into Gaza and kind of full force, calling it Gideon's Chariot. And within the first actions of Gideon's Chariot, they started out attacking over the last week or so 670 targets, specific targets of knocking out known military assets in the region and some hospitals where Hamas was using to build tunnels underneath. And that's where they were able to take out some of the leadership that was there. They've also sent in 5 divisions simultaneously raiding into tunnels and buildings in areas where they had first prevented and had been stopped from the past administration. And then there are also the two spots that have been reported that they're going into is Jabalia and Khan Yunis. And then there are also, I think, a key point to what you were talking about, the humanitarian aid. They're setting up 4 humanitarian aid distribution centers where they'll be able to receive civilian populations that Israel is in charge of, not just throwing it out there. Because this is the difference of what the Trump administration is doing versus what the Biden administration did. Is the Biden administration said just send it in via Red Cross and let the people deal with it. Well, what ended up happening? Hamas took it over because they had the weapons, the civilians don't, quote unquote civilians, and the civilians who needed it in those areas, because there are, even though there are the populated areas where there's nothing going on, there are areas where they lack water and food, because it's a military zone. That's where the aid needs to go. Well, now if Israel's distributing it, they're the ones controlling it. They can make sure that the right people get it. And so this is very beneficial to those who are in need in those regions. Is it the mass numbers that everybody's saying? Unfortunately not. For the media hysteria and what is being called Hollywood. And so this is very, very positive news, one, for Israel and their response to taking out terrorists, but then two, for the civilians within Gaza, who are there. And then there's also continued talks with the Trump administration, with countries like Libya, Azerbaijan, a few other countries in the Middle East, to take in these civilians who want to leave Gaza and no longer want to stay there, to repopulate them and to give them a life somewhere else. So great news for Israel. Now let's see if Witkoff holds that line. Let's continue to pray for him, make sure he holds
Yes.
that line and doesn't cave into these ceasefires in allowing these terrorists to continue to get away with what they got away with, or are getting away with on October 7th, and releasing the 57, 58 hostages that are still there.
And depending on how accurate the polls are within Gaza, they say upwards of 50% of the people want to leave Gaza. So this is something that we need to pray about. God, how would that play out? Now, President Trump recommended or floated the idea of sending them to Libya because we're freezing all of Libya's assets because of their terrorism acts in the past. And Libya wants that money unfrozen. So he threw out the idea, sometimes he'll do this. He'll just throw out an idea and you don't know whether he's serious or not serious. He's kind of trying to throw it to the wind and see what happens. And he threw a number of 1 million Gazans moving to Libya. Now, it's a Muslim country, matter of fact, a radical Muslim country. So you don't know what you're going to create when you throw them into that type of environment. Libya also has open trading blocks, slave blocks, where they trade openly slaves within their country from other countries in Africa. So it's not the greatest place to go to, but that is something he floated this week. But they've got to find answers for this. And I think that many believe that the talks in the Middle East was a building of a bridge to possibly having other countries begin to take in these Palestinians. If that happens, what needs to happen is they don't need to be taken in and become refugees in those countries. They need to have a path to citizenship within those countries, because you still see Palestinian refugees in Syria and Lebanon and other countries, Jordan, other countries where they should be citizens by now. They've been refugees for 50 years, whatever. It doesn't need to be that way, because let's think about the humanity of a Palestinian person. When you don't have an identity, you don't belong to anything or anybody, you struggle. And I think for this would be a grace, compassionate thing to do. So anyway, that's some of the issues, especially with Israel. Pray for the wisdom. It is very clear. Netanyahu has made it very clear they are going to take over the entire Gaza Strip. There are floating ideas of Hamas saying maybe 9 hostages being released, but they're holding the line right now that no, we want all of them. Latest reports, I think, is 21. I think that they believe are alive. The rest are already dead, but they do want them out. This trickling out, although we're thankful for those that get to come out, is just a prolonging of the inevitable, and of course it increases the suffering of the hostages, and it allows Hamas to stay in power. So their goal is go in, take over the entire strip, bring humanitarian aid in, take out all the Hamas, get the last hostages, and they're offering, part of the deal is if they get the hostages, that the Hamas leadership can be relocated. They're not going to kill them. They're just going to let them go somewhere else. And so to me, it should be a good deal. But, you know, when you have a spirit of Islam, a spirit that's on you of death, you can't hear sometimes. It's almost like Pharaoh, whose heart was hardened toward the Jewish people. Anyway, okay, so that's enough on that. We're going to move toward President Biden and the health issues that just came out, was announced yesterday about having prostate cancer, metastatic, and it's quite advanced in its timing. So it's very interesting because we're looking at this news break now. We want to have compassion for anybody who has a disease or has that. We could all be in that boat. Some of us have been. Some of you on this live stream have had cancer, and we want to have great compassion as believers for that. But we also have to see what the enemy is trying to do in the midst of all this, and using this to detract from what is getting our nation right back to its original intent, and uprooting the corruption that has come from the Biden administration. David Axelrod, a former Clinton aide, said, "Oh, that now he has cancer. We must stop all talk about his senility and his dementia." And so there is a narrative on the left now. Okay, let's turn this news story. Stop talking about his dementia. Stop talking about what he did while he was in office, and let's just focus with compassion upon his cancer right now. Well, we can do both. We can have compassion for him, and we can still deal with the corruption. It has to be done. So the question is, how do you get this far along in cancer and be in the White House, who has checkups all the time, and it not be known? And so we found a clip of it was from Morning Joe, which is a liberal show on MSNBC, and he interviewed an oncologist, I believe it is, and he shares his point of view. So let's play that, Zach.
You're an oncologist, obviously incredibly respected. You believe that it is likely, just for those just tuning in, you believe it is likely, if this prostate cancer has spread to the bone, that he could have had it for up to a decade, but certainly it's likely. Would it be fair to say it's likely to have had this for at least several years?
Oh, more than several years. You don't get prostate cancer.
So I just want to stop you. So this is not speculation. If you have prostate cancer that is spread to the bone, then he's most certainly, you were saying, had it when he was president of the United States.
Oh, yeah. He did not develop it in the last 100, 200 days. He had it while he was president. He probably had it at the start of his presidency in 2021. Yes, that I don't think there's any disagreement about that.
Okay, so there you have from the doctors, and he is just echoing what many doctors are saying. This is not an isolated opinion here, and there are tests to find that, so forth, and especially when it starts spreading. So the question is why, and what is going on here right now concerning this. And I read an article, an op-ed by an author named Sasha Stone, and it was called "How to Kill a Story." And she talked about in this article about how the unlikelihood of the president of the United States who would have cancer growing in his body went undetected. And as with everything else we've seen, she said from the cocaine in the White House to Trump's bad security detail when he almost was killed. You can say all this stuff, but he said her point is that most believe, and her sources would say, is that his plan was to just limp through his administration and hopefully get reelected in 24, and then appoint Kamala Harris to be the first black woman, and black woman to be president of the United States. Now, a lot of that's speculation, but we're not too far off from the truth there, I think. But the fact was that he had this the whole time, and it could explain some of his moments that he had where he would lose his cognitive abilities. It could be he was on medications. We don't know anything. Last report, I also read a report from an aide within the White House. They said this is the least transparent administration ever, and that literally just to ask a question, they would try to ask the president a question or one of his aides a question, and it would take months to get an answer back. He said they had no transparency on anything. So it doesn't surprise us that if this was known while he was president, again, I don't know that it would be hidden. So now we have this play here because you're exposing all of what he was doing, the pardons, all the other issues, the executive orders, all these different things. And we pretty well know that somebody else was calling the shots, but now this comes into play. And so this is a side story that wants to detract, I believe, from pursuing that. And we've got to pray that they keep pursuing so that justice can come in our land.
Yeah, and everybody's getting upset with the Cash Patel and AG Bondi for not doing enough right away. Well, the problem is they're having to sift through thousands and if not millions of pieces of information on who knows how many different storylines. And there was some information that came out on Hunter Biden and a lot of different things. And then there's this. And so Trump kind of hinted at this as possibly being in line with the auto pin storyline. So there's a lot going on. And to sit there and say that they didn't know about it is very misleading. Van Jones, a very prominent CNN commentator, came out and said, if this is true, this is damaging and this will take decades for the Democrats to ever be able to overcome. And the hope and prayer is that those who would lean more left would start to now question a lot of their viewpoints and the people that they listen to, because this is a cover-up job. Even though Morning Joe Scarborough said these things, he was the same one to sit there and say there's nothing wrong with this man. And it's like, okay, well, let's go pull those clips up, because people are pulling those up on the right wing all the time. And so we have to kind of point that out here. So hopefully this can be kind of a day of reckoning where these people start to realize and start to understand, oh, we need to start thinking for ourselves and seeing what's really put before us rather than just, taking hook, line, and sinker with blind eyes what is being said to us. And moving forward into the decades ahead, not only is this going to be traumatic for the Democratic Party, but I think even those same Democrats and even Republicans need to recognize who these people were who were in office. Because a lot of times what you'll see is these people come out of these administrations and start running for offices in their local states and or federally. And I think in reality is we need to start earmarking these people and saying, you were a part of this administration, especially those who saw him every day, who interacted with him and said that there was nothing wrong, who didn't kind of say, hey, this is a problem, running up the flagpole. And I mean, this is partly how the Democrats operate. They kind of stay synced up and they work together more as a team. Whereas, for this Republicans would flag it up the wazoo. But it's like, hey, like this is one of those situations where the fate of the country is, or more so the state of the country, is in the hands of somebody who is known to be sick. And if this is true from what this doctor is saying decades before, I mean, this goes back to when he was vice president, most likely, is they knew about this and they covered it up. You had the physician last year who said there's nothing wrong, he's in perfect health. And so now we have major questions about anything the Democrats say. And hopefully the reality is that the American people can see through this and get back to kind of that original intent we talked about of standing for freedom and understanding who our politicians are and their health to be able to make certain decisions.
And Representative James Comer brings up an issue on the auto pin issue, and I want to tie this together. Here's a quick clip of him talking about why this is important that we uncover this.
You are going and looking at who is controlling this auto pen, because Joe Biden, I mean, he's demonstrating that he doesn't have all the cognitive capabilities they had. That interview was from 2023.
Yeah, that's hard evidence. Early in the President Biden's term as president, it clearly shows that He was in significant mental decline. It questions who was actually making the decisions. So what we found is not just with the pardons he issued, but many of the executive orders that the courts are now using to Trump-proof many of the executive orders that President Trump is trying to implement to make government more efficient. Many of these executive orders, as well as the pardons of Biden's entire family as a result of our investigation, these were all signed with the auto pen. And clearly from that interview, which was many, many months prior to the heavy use of the auto pen, Joe Biden wasn't capable of making decisions. He wasn't coherent. We think we've identified who the staffers are. Jason, you all have done great work with that over at Heritage Oversight. We're going to bring everyone that we believe was involved in any role in the use of the auto pen. We're going to invite them to come in for a transcribed interview. If they want, then they will receive a subpoena and they will have a full-blown deposition. But we want to find out who was actually making the decisions in the White House during the last 9 months of the Biden administration when he was clear.
So that to me is huge, and that speaks to what we're dealing with right now, because this affects Fauci, Milley, the guy from the military, of course, his whole family. On and on. These people are immune now. I don't know who else. I can't remember if he gave Comey one or whatever, but he gave a lot of people these pardons. And if it's proven that he did not do it with a cognitive mind, then everything's open for investigation as well as prosecution, and we can get some justice. This is where God says, I hate unjust scales. It's abomination to him. And this is where we must pray, if it's true, which I don't doubt it is, that there would be revelation of this and that it would come out. I think this is a major thing that needs to happen right now. And we cannot, we got to pray that we do not allow the physical thing as diagnosis to deter from this investigation. I know that there are going to be those who are going to pursue, but the enemy is going to try to use this, and we can do both. I've said it once already today. We can do both. We can still have the compassion. Let's have compassion for somebody going through this, but let's also get to the root of the problem of our nation's corruption and deal with this issue.
Yeah, at the very least, the names of those who are making these decisions needs to come out so that their influence can be cut off at the knees for future administrations. Because if it's true, everybody's been saying, this was really the Obama 3.0 administration. Okay, that's fine. That's over with. Now let's put a cut right here. This is the thin red line where we got to say enough's enough. You had your chance. You had your shot. This is what you did to the country, and hopefully the American people can see through this. Because this is what it ultimately is going to boils down to. We get back to the original intent of the country. It was for Americans to be informed enough to be able to make their own decisions as far as the leaders that they want. And if they elect these people, if they put these people back in office, that's kind of on us as Americans for being ignorant of the facts. And this is where spiritually we've been talking about being an Issachar company of those who understand the times and seasons that we're in. This is one of those moments where we need to pray wisdom and clarity for believers and non-believers alike to be able to see clearly on issues like this so that they can move forward and understand a true just leader moving forward in the days ahead.
Well, amen to that. Well, I'm going to have to run, but I want Zach, if you will, to cover the tariffs as the last point you have. I put a post up by Senator Kennedy about it on our pipeline report. He may want to play that, but I'm going to let him cover the tariffs and then make sure that we keep praying for this, because it is helping our economy. It is exposing the abuse that we have faced as Americans for many years. And because we were such a juggernaut economically and money, we just thought, oh, well, just abuse us. We're doing fine. And now there's this reckoning that President Trump is bringing and just wants a balanced scale on this issue. And I think even the left, and Zach will tell you a little bit about that, is beginning to, look at this differently now. So why don't you close out with that, Zach? And I'll be back with you guys. Check my podcast out. I'm covering some of this stuff on the war issue as well. God bless you.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us all the way from Colombia. And like you said, I want to talk about this tariff issue. And I mentioned it before. the last several weeks that there are those on the right and the left who've been kind of saying, Trump's doing a disservice to the American public, and Trump's been warning people, look, these tariffs, it can cause some pain. And he's not wrong on that. That's the general idea of why people don't want tariffs. But I want to play this clip from Senator Kennedy that kind of explains it best as to the stance of it. And this is why what Kennedy just says is the very reason why there are those who have opposed the tariffs. And there are some critiques that they have that are completely right, where they've kind of said, well, Trump kind of won on this. So I'm going to play this. And you can understand what I'm saying.
Make of that deal, and what message do you think it sends to the rest of the world? And Scott Besson said 130 countries are lined up.
Well, I think it's obvious. Unless you're the reason that your parents drank, you see that it was a big victory, not just for President Trump, but for America. Before the president did what he did, China's tariffs on the United States were a little over 20% on average. Now they're 10. Our tariffs on China were a little over 20. Now they're 30. That's a 20-point swing. Now, I've listened all day to some of my Democratic colleagues say that, well, we didn't get anything for it. If you believe that, I'm not saying you're the dumbest person in the world, but you better hope the dumbest person in the world doesn't die. It was a clear victory. The other point I would make, I think Trump understands how to deal with China. Look, the Chinese, not the people of China, I'm speaking about the Chinese Communist Party. They're thieves. They steal with both hands.
And I think that's kind of a good point to interject on is President Trump. And I think this is something Americans, because we elected him, we have to let him rule the way he sees. And unfortunately for us is the decisions that he's making and the policies that he's inputting, whether we agree with him or our favorite pundit or whoever agrees with them or disagrees with them, he's coming out ahead on these deals. Now, in the long run, obviously, you don't want to have tariffs. You want to be able to have free trade. But if there's not fair trade, then you got to kind of play the level playing field there. And what Kennedy points out at the end is like, look, China cheats is from day one when you let them get a part of a trade agreement or anything, is they cheat and they steal and they do things that are in service to themselves, and they line their back pockets and not into the service to the world. And that's what Trump's trying to point out to the rest of the world, and that's what he's doing. Is people are starting to see, oh, this is really happening. There's somebody who's finally going to stand up to this. And this goes with their Silk Road initiative of trying to create an economic superpower. But Trump knows this, is that Xi Jinping, the leader of China, the communist leader, he has people behind him who are snipping at the bits to see his downfall. So there's pressure on both sides here. Now that Trump is putting pressure on him to be able to make sure that, one, the world sees what's really happening here as far as these tariffs go, but also there's pressure internally that he knows he can use to his advantage and leverage to be able to get China to back down. Because a lot before last week, before China caved, a lot of it was, well, China's never going to cave. They're going to do this. And look, that's why I said we got to let it play out. We got to let Trump play, because the question is how far were the Chinese government going to be able to push its people? And we saw, okay, maybe this is kind of a short stopgap. Are they going to remaneuver and refigure things out? Because you started to have riots. That's what they didn't want. Information got to leak out. That's what they don't want. Are they going to shut it down and then come harder? That's still yet to be seen there. So something to pray about for our Christian brothers and sisters, and even just the innocent civilians within China who are trying to make a living and put food on the table. Something for them to start to become more aware of, that they get strategies that, because of this pressure, now that they can start seeing, oh, this government isn't as strong as it's believed. And so we want to look there and continue to pay attention there, continue to pray for Trump. And because what this is also doing is this is bringing people to the negotiating table. Somebody put in the comments about here, Canada has tariffs on the U.S. That's exactly it. Other countries have tariffs on the U.S. and vice versa, and they're still negotiating what those will end up being like between the trade, economic trade for the countries. And Bassett said is like, look, if the countries don't come and Treasury Secretary Bassett said is if these countries don't come and start negotiating fairly, then we're going to start putting in back on tariffs again. And look, this is only a 90-day pause, if I remember correctly, of the Chinese deal. So China has they need to make a deal, otherwise it's going to go back. And Trump talked about making it even harder. So this is something that we're going to see play out the rest of these next few months, this summer, on this tariff deal, which kind of leads into the last point of kind of what we talked about of titling it 47's Middle East stance. There's a big question, and I think rightfully so, and this is why we want to pray for the administration and all those involved here of what to think about when Trump goes to the Middle East and negotiates with these countries who, for all intents and purposes, have sided and been a part of a detriment to the American society. And I'm having to be careful because we're on YouTube. Some of the things that we're saying, I don't want to flag us. But if we do get flagged, we're on Rumble. So please be sure to follow us on the Pipeline Report on Rumble. And so hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. And so the reality is Trump making these negotiations and talking with these world leaders is what he's doing is there's a book by a gentleman by the name of Dennis Peacock talked about the destiny of nations and how each nation and lays it out scripturally. Each nation has its own destiny, just as we as individuals have our own destiny. Psalms 139:16 written about us before we were in our mother's womb. Each nation has its own destiny. And Trump's point on these negotiations was to focus on America and let each nation and each leader focus on each leader. And obviously the big question comes into with the new leader, president, if you want to call him that, of Syria, who a few months ago was an ISIS terrorist leader. Trump says he's willing to forgive and give people the opportunity to rise to the occasion. There's some wisdom in that, but there's also some kind of, trust but verify there, as Reagan taught. But also Trump's following Reagan's stance on the Middle East in this, which is you need to fill the gap. Otherwise, your enemy will fill the gap that is there. And specifically with the Middle East is let's start trading negotiations with these countries. Let's start some economic development negotiations there because Saudi Arabia and all these other countries who have all this oil money, they know the younger generation who are coming into leadership, they know they need to diversify. Because if anything were to happen, if their oil were to dry up or you shift away from natural gas or gas vehicles, ICE vehicles, then their economy goes bust. And they don't have a secondary industry to build themselves back up. And this is something they've been trying to do for decades. And there's a theory that October 7th was meant to stop Saudi Arabia from joining the Abraham Accords. That's kind of floated out there. But what you did see, and that people were upset that Trump didn't visit Israel on his Middle East tour, is part of the negotiations and part of the discussions that Trump was having with these Middle East leaders, from Saudi Arabia to Qatar to Syria to Turkey, was to get them to join the Abraham Accords. Now, there's speculation about whether that's actually a good or bad deal. And then there's obviously the plane and all that stuff, which the plane deal just looks bad. And we mentioned that last week. But I think the truth on that is a little bit of a media hysteria coming out about what this plane actually is. And if anything, the U.S. takes it and looks at it to see the specs and technology that Qatar has. And maybe they try to spy on us, but maybe you reverse engineer it and see what they have. There's a lot that goes out there, but I want to dive into that. But the reality is, on these Middle East negotiations with these leaders, is Trump's filling the void here. He knows who these players are, and hopefully what he can do, say with Rubio, say with Vance, say with Witkoff, those who are there, he can teach them how to start playing and negotiating more so hardball strategy-wise with these people. That's Trump's greatest strength right now, is showing the world what is really happening. And Barry Siegel with Vision for Israel pointed it out. He's like, look, these negotiations have been going on kind of behind the scenes via Skype and Zoom. if you want to say, just like we saw during COVID. But this needed to happen for the world to see that America's not afraid, not just going to sit behind a desk and try to pound you with wars and things that we've done in the past. Is we need to go out there, peacefully negotiate, at least try, start to. And if things heat up, then okay, we'll see where those things lie. But the reality is, Trump and this administration is doing something that we haven't really seen in a very long time. And the initial dialogue here is to kind of open the door. And I was talking to Pastor Tim about this before we started. And a positive is that, okay, you have these nations start moving towards an economic relations with Israel via Abraham Accords. Well, what happens if, okay, they start economic negotiations, they start building relationships with people outside their world paradigm, outside the Islamic faith, outside, whether it be Christian, Jews, etc., stuff like that. So they start to question. This is how the Lord and the Holy Spirit can use this economic open door here to then have Arab Christians, Arabs go in and start spreading and sharing the gospel. And this could be a way to openly get it out in the forefront. And now there's a big hurdle of getting around Sharia law in those countries. That is going to have to bring strategy and wisdom for those who go into the land and share the gospel. And there are those. Sean Foyt has been a big part of doing that in certain regions in the Middle East. And we know some missionaries there as well, but for their safety's sake, we're not going to highlight them. But the reality is God can use this to his advantage. Now, there's a flip side. It could be used to a disadvantage. And I think that's those who are kind of calling this out and concerned about this, they're right to be concerned, but let's pray that the Lord can use this for his advantage in the days ahead, to be able to get back to even what, we talk about here, is so that souls can be saved, so that the gospel of the kingdom can be spread throughout the world. And this can be a great open door for that to be able to occur. We look at natural political policies that are taking place, but let's see it through God's eyes. Let's see through the kingdom's eyes of how this is an open door for freedom to actually to occur. A lot of your missionaries in the early 1900s, late 1800s, they would use economics is going into countries, especially Africa, out of Britain and England, to be a way to share the gospel. A lot of them, took a coffin and the Bible with them because they knew they probably would never come back. But they would do it through whether it be medicine and helping them overcome diseases, or bringing trade, making trade routes, etc., stuff like that. And so it was an opportunity for them to be able to spread the gospel of the kingdom. And there's a work that's still being done there because of those seeds that were sown there. And there's seeds being sown now in the Middle East, and hopefully this can be another open door for that. So we want to, hopefully this helps you guys understand what's going on. We obviously do want to continue to pray for this administration, for the steps that they're making. They do seem to be making steps, especially on this Israel-Hamas negotiations, that are positive for releasing the innocent there, and then also for being able to defend themselves moving forward, so that these type of heinous attacks can't continue to happen, despite the hysteria from the world and even the rising of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that we're seeing in the world today. So with that, I want to close out. Thank you each for following along with us. Don't forget, tomorrow we have our noon prayer. If anybody's here locally who hasn't gone to Columbia, you can join us. We'll be in the auditorium, and if it changes, we'll let you guys know as we continue to pray for hot topics here locally. And then also we'll back up next week here on Monday of talking about things that are in the news, praying for not only the office of the president, but things that are happening with the United States and this administration. So blessings, and we'll see you guys later. Have a good one.